The snow had been falling since before dawn, and by 7 in the morning, Ridgeline Road was the kind of white that swallows sound whole. Daniel Brooks drove the old Chevy pickup with both hands loose on the wheel. Not because he was careless, but because he had learned long ago that you don't fight mountain roads in winter, you read them, the way you'd read a sleeping animal, looking for the twitch that means it's about to wake. Beside him, Ethan sat with his backpack on his lap, arms wrapped around it, the way a smaller child might hold a stuffed animal. He was 8 years old and had long outgrown stuffed animals, but he had not yet outgrown needing something to hold. "Gonna snow all day?" Ethan asked. "Looks like it. Is school gonna close?" "Already called in." "You're with me today." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I draw in the garage while you work? You can do whatever you want as long as you stay clear of the lifts." The boy nodded and looked back out the window. The pines on either side of the road were so heavy with snow they'd bent into arches, and between them the gray sky pressed down low and close, the way it does in Colorado in January when the storm isn't going anywhere. Daniel had grown up 12 miles from here, in Glenwood, and he knew these roads the way he knew the creak in his own kitchen floor. He knew which curves demanded patience and which ones let you breathe. He did not know, at 7:14 in the morning, that the silver Rolls-Royce Ghost coming around the bend 300 yards ahead had already lost traction on a patch of ice, invisible beneath 2 inches of powder. He heard it before he saw it, the particular sliding sound of a large vehicle surrendering to physics. A hollow whoosh like something being erased, and then the Rolls was sideways across the road, and then it was not on the road at all. It went into the ditch and struck the base of a Douglas fir with a sound like a shotgun blast, and the airbags went. And then everything was very still again, and the snow kept falling as if nothing had happened. Daniel had already stopped the truck. "Stay here," he said. "Ethan, stay." He was out the door and down the embankment before the echo of the crash had finished rolling through the trees. The driver's side of the Rolls had taken the full force of the impact. The hood had compressed, and steam was rising from somewhere under it. And the windshield on the passenger side had fractured into a white web. Daniel got to the driver's side door and wrenched it open. It fought him. The frame was warped, and inside, he found a woman. She was in her late 30s, maybe 40. Dark hair, matted with blood from a cut above her left temple. A silk blouse that cost more than Daniel made in a week, now torn at the shoulder. Her seatbelt had held her, which had probably saved her life. But her head had struck the window hard enough to knock her out cold. Daniel put 2 fingers to her neck. Pulse was there. Fast, but steady. He checked her airway, tilted her head carefully, looked for signs of a spinal injury the way a man who had once taken a wilderness first aid course 8 years ago could. Nothing he could confirm. He smelled no fuel. But the steam worried him. "Hey," he said, and touched her cheek. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyes moved beneath her lids, but she did not open them. He made the call on his phone. 911, Ridgeline Road, half a mile above the county line marker, and while he was on with the dispatcher he kept his hand on the woman's wrist, thumb against the inside of her pulse point, just holding it there. It seemed important that someone was holding on. Dad. Ethan had come down the embankment anyway, which Daniel had expected. He looked at his son's face and saw nothing of fear there, only that concentrated watchfulness the boy had inherited from nobody Daniel knew, the look of a child who observes everything and says very little. "Is she okay? She's breathing." "Go back up to the truck and turn on the hazard lights." "The button's on the dash." Ethan went. He did not argue. The woman's lashes fluttered. She said something Daniel couldn't make out. Then her fingers moved and found the arm of the seat and gripped it hard. The grip of someone surfacing from underwater. "Easy," Daniel said. "You hit a tree. There's an ambulance coming. Don't move your neck." She opened her eyes. They were dark gray, the color, Daniel thought stupidly, of the sky above them, and they went first to his face, and then past him to the broken windshield, and then back to his face. "My driver," she said. "You're alone in the car." She closed her eyes again. "I drove myself. I never." She stopped. I always drive myself when I don't want anyone to know where I'm going. Daniel didn't respond to that. He reached across her and tried the passenger door, which opened cleanly and let some cold air through to clear the smell of airbag chemicals. The ambulance was 16 minutes away. Daniel stayed. When the paramedics came down the bank and took over, he stepped back and let them work. He noticed, as he was climbing back up toward the road, that something had fallen from his jacket pocket. He went back for it and found it in the snow. A wooden pencil, hexagonal, dark red, stamped Barol, drafting along the barrel. It had belonged to his wife, Laura. Ethan had found it in her desk after she died and had asked to keep it. And Daniel had carried it in his pocket ever since without entirely knowing why. He picked it up and put it back. By the time he reached the truck, the paramedics were loading the woman onto a gurney. She was conscious now, asking questions. And one of the paramedics was answering her in the patient voice you use on someone who has had a concussion. A second ambulance unit arrived. A sheriff's deputy appeared from somewhere. The road was filling up with orange vests and radio static. Daniel started the truck. "Is she going to be okay?" Ethan asked. "I think so. Did you tell them your name?" Daniel looked at his son. "Why would I do that?" Ethan considered this for a moment, the way he considered most things, turning it over, looking at its edges. "I don't know," he said finally. "In movies, they always find out." "This isn't a movie," Daniel said, and pulled out onto the road. The pencil pressed against his ribs through the jacket pocket, small and solid, the way it always did. He didn't think any more about the woman in the Rolls-Royce, or at least, he told himself he didn't. The town of Silver Creek had exactly one stoplight, which blinked yellow from October through April, because the roads were too icy to trust a full red-green cycle, and the locals had long since learned to treat the intersection the same way they treated everything else in winter, with suspicion and deliberate care. Daniel's garage was a 3-bay converted barn at the east end of Spruce Street, behind the house he'd bought with Laura 8 years ago, when Silver Creek property was still cheap enough for a mechanic and a part-time art teacher to afford. The house was beige with brown trim and a covered porch that collected drifts. The garage had a hand-painted sign above the door, Brooks Auto, in letters that Ethan had been slowly improving with each winter. This year he had added a small sketch of a wrench below the text. It was better than anything Daniel could have done. Inside, the garage smelled of motor oil and propane heat. And, on the days when Ethan was there, of the particular dryness of drawing paper. Ethan had claimed a workbench in the corner near the space heater, dragged a stool from the house, and arranged his things on it with the seriousness of a professional setting up an office. Pencil case, 3 sketchbooks in descending size, a jar of water, and the red pencil which he borrowed from Daniel's pocket each morning with the same solemn ceremony, and returned each evening with equal care. The drawings Ethan made were unlike anything Daniel understood how to evaluate. He knew what he liked and what Ethan made. He liked very much, but he had no language for it. The boy drew houses mostly, sometimes trees, sometimes figures, small and distant, with ambiguous features. On more than a few pages, there were 3 figures together. 2 tall, 1 small. Daniel had never asked who they were. He was fairly certain he knew. Laura had died 19 months ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed 14 months after her first symptoms, which she had downplayed, and he had not pushed on, and which they had, both in different ways, pretended were something smaller than they were. She was 36. She had been painting a series of watercolors of the Elk River when she got the diagnosis, not finished yet. Still hanging in the hallway above the thermostat, the last one, a smear of blue and tan that she had titled, "Almost Done," in pencil on the back, which Daniel had eventually decided she'd meant as a joke because she had possessed that kind of humor. After she died, Daniel worked. He worked 12 hours, then 14, then sometimes 16. Not because the garage was overwhelmed with business. Silver Creek in winter was quiet. 3, maybe 4 vehicles a day, but because work had the virtue of taking up exactly the space it occupied, no more and no less, unlike grief, which expanded to fill whatever room you gave it, and then expanded past that. He woke at 5:30 each morning. He got Ethan fed and dressed. On school days he drove him in. And on no-school days, Ethan came to the garage. Their neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Ruth, brought food twice a week without being asked casseroles, mostly, and once a spectacular pot of chili, and Daniel accepted this because he had learned that refusing help only made the people offering it feel bad, and he had no interest in compounding grief by manufacturing guilt. But he did not talk about Laura much. Not to Ruth, not to his brother in Grand Junction, not to anyone. He talked to Ethan about her, sometimes. Carefully. In small doses, the way you'd add salt. Precisely, with attention. Knowing too much ruins everything. The morning of the crash, after Daniel pulled the truck back into the garage bay and cut the engine, Ethan had been quiet for a long time. He got his stool, arranged his things, uncapped his pencil case. Then he said, without looking up, she had the same kind of eyes as Mom's friend from the art fair. The one with the long coat. Daniel had looked up from the work order he was reading. What? The lady in the car. Her eyes. Ethan selected a pencil. Kind of gray. Daniel watched his son for a moment. You couldn't have seen her eyes. You were in the truck. I came down the bank, Ethan said, with the mild patience of someone correcting a small factual error. You told me to go back up and I did. But I came down first. Daniel returned to the work order. Your observation skills are going to get you in trouble someday. You always say that, because it's been true so far. Ethan opened his sketchbook and began drawing. Daniel could tell, without looking, that it was the woman in the Rolls-Royce. He did not say anything about this. The cut above her temple required 6 stitches. She had a mild concussion, 2 bruised ribs from the seatbelt, and a hairline fracture in her left wrist that would require a soft cast for 4 weeks. The attending physician at Aspen Valley Hospital told her she had been extremely lucky, which she received with the polite attentiveness of someone hearing a story they have already been told. Victoria Hale was not good at being a patient. She was good at a great many other things. She was good at seeing, immediately and completely, the structural logic of an organization, which parts were load-bearing, and which were decorative, and which were quietly rotting. She was good at reading people, though she had come to distrust this ability because it had taught her, over 38 years, that most people's primary motivation was self-interest, dressed in varying quality of clothing. She was good at identifying art, not just the good from the bad, but the urgent from the merely competent. The work that would last from the work that only thought it would. She had built Hale Arts Group from a single gallery in Soho into a holding entity, with 14 properties across 5 countries, and an acquisition portfolio valued at slightly over $3 billion. She was not good at slowing down, asking for help, or being in debt to anyone. This last quality was the one that occupied her now. In the private room the hospital had arranged for her, while her assistant Petra brought a change of clothes and her phone, and the various urgent matters that did not stop being urgent because their employer had driven a Rolls-Royce into a Douglas fir. There had been a man. She remembered almost nothing of the first few minutes after the impact. The airbag, the cold, a smell of chemicals, the particular disorientation of not knowing which way is up, but she remembered a hand on her wrist. A steady pressure. She remembered a voice saying, "Easy." She remembered gray eyes. No. She corrected herself. His eyes had been brown. It was her own eyes that were gray. She remembered large hands, engine grease in the creases of the knuckles, a jacket that had seen several winters, a quality of stillness that was different from calm, something more deliberate, something that had been chosen. He had not given his name. He had not waited for the ambulance. He had simply been there, and then he had not been there, and the paramedics had arrived and taken over with their equipment and their efficient voices. And no one she had asked afterward, the paramedics, the deputy, the driver of the second unit, none of them knew who the man had been. What they did know, and told her when she asked, there had been a gray pickup truck, older model Chevy, parked on the shoulder. A man and a small boy. The man had gone down to the car immediately, before anyone else arrived. He had stayed until the paramedics came. Then he had left. She thought about this for a long time. She thought about the hand on her wrist, not gripping, just present, just the weight of a thumb against her pulse, and she could not explain why this felt significant, in a way that $3 billion worth of strategic advantage had never felt. It was not attraction, exactly. It was something older and simpler, the feeling of a human being choosing to stay when they could have kept driving, and then choosing to leave when the staying was no longer needed. She told Petra to find him. Petra was an extremely competent woman of 32, who had worked for Victoria for 4 years, without once asking a question that wasn't necessary, and she took this instruction with the same expression she took all of them. How much information do we have? Older Chevy pickup, gray. Silver Creek plates, I think. The deputy mentioned Silver Creek, small boy, maybe 7 or 8. The man was a mechanic, his hands. Victoria paused. There can't be that many auto shops in Silver Creek. There were, it turned out, exactly one. Petra had the information inside 48 hours. Daniel Brooks, 39, owner and sole employee of Brooks Auto, on Spruce Street. Widower. One son, Ethan, age 8. No social media. No major financial events of note. A credit score that indicated someone who paid his bills methodically and borrowed nothing he didn't need to. Victoria looked at this information for a long time. She was aware of the shape of what she was considering. She was aware that it was strange, not in a way she couldn't justify to herself, but in a way she could not quite justify to anyone else. She was the CEO of a $3 billion enterprise. She had resources, staff, a name that opened doors on 4 continents. She could write a check, have a lawyer, send a letter, arrange a meeting through proper channels. Any of these things would be reasonable. What she was considering was not reasonable. What she was considering was renting a small car and driving to Silver Creek, Colorado, under a name that was not her own, and finding out what kind of person Daniel Brooks actually was, without the filter that her money and her name created around every interaction she had ever had. She had spent her entire adult life inside that filter. She knew what it did. She knew the way people straightened and performed and calculated when they knew who she was. She had not, in many years, had the experience of someone treating her as simply a person. The man on Ridgeline Road had not known who she was. He had been simply present, simply useful, simply kind, without a single calculation in it. She wanted to understand that. She told Petra she was taking a personal week. She booked a room at a bed and breakfast in Silver Creek under the name Emily Carter, and she rented a 10-year-old Honda Civic from an agency in Glenwood Springs, and she drove to Silver Creek on a Tuesday morning in late January, and her broken wrist was still in its soft cast, and the snow was still falling. The Honda's heater made a sound like something desperate and small trapped inside the dashboard. And by the time Emily Carter pulled into the gravel lot of Brooks Auto at 11:15 on a Tuesday morning, the car's interior temperature was noticeably colder than the outside air, which was 22 degrees. She sat in the car for a moment and breathed steam and looked at the garage. 3 bays, 1 open, the other 2 closed against the weather. The hand-painted sign. A snow shovel leaning against the left wall, with a precision that suggested it was always kept there. A coffee can full of sand beside the door. The small details of a place that was used daily and maintained simply, without pretension. She got out of the car. The open bay held a late-model Toyota Tacoma on a lift, and underneath it was a man in gray Carhartt overalls. A light mounted to the undercarriage above his head, some manner of socket wrench in his left hand. She could see his boots, Red Wing work boots, worn at the toe, laced tight. The visible portion of his arms suggested someone who worked with them. "Be with you in a minute," he said, without looking down. "Take your time," she said. He came down from the lift a few minutes later. He was taller than she remembered taller, or her memory of him had flattened the details. He wiped his hands on a rag tucked in his belt and looked at her. And she watched his face for recognition, and found none, which she had expected, and which still, obscurely, relieved her. "What can I do for you?" "The heater," she said. On the drive from Glenwood it went from bad to worse. He nodded once, and went to the Honda without further preamble. She stood back and watched him open the hood, look at the engine with the brisk, comprehensive attention of someone reading a text in a familiar language. He started it, listened to the heater run, turned a few things with practiced hands. Blend door actuator, he said. Probably. I'll need to pull the dash to confirm. Couple hours, if the parts are in Glenwood. I can call ahead. That's fine. He looked at her, briefly a glance. The evaluation you make when someone says, that's fine in a context where most people say, how much? You? In town for a bit? A week, she said. Maybe longer. He called in the parts. She sat on the bench against the garage wall, a plank between two sawhorses, covered with a piece of carpet, and looked around the space. On the second workbench, the one near the space heater in the corner, there was a stool with drawing things arranged on it. A sketchbook lay open. A large drawing of a house, viewed from slightly below, the porch railing detailed with patient precision. That's good, she said. He was on the phone. He looked at her, then at the bench, then back at the phone, and finished his call. My son's. How old is he? 8. She did not say anything else for a moment. She looked at the drawing. The line quality in the porch railing had a kind of sureness that art school students spent years trying to achieve, and most never did. He's at school? When it's open. Today it's open. The parts arrived from Glenwood in the early afternoon. He worked on the car with a focused efficiency that she found unexpectedly calming. She had nowhere to be genuinely nowhere, for the first time in years, and she had not entirely processed what that felt like. She answered emails on her phone, using a secondary account she'd set up for this, under Emily Carter. Routine things. She had delegated everything else to Petra. The heater worked. He charged her $80 for parts and labor, which was less than she had paid for a sandwich in Manhattan, and he wrote the amount on a paper receipt in clear block handwriting. You're visiting from where? He asked. Not as small talk, she sensed, but because her plates were a Colorado rental and her accent had traces of something Eastern. New York, mostly, she said. Which was true. He nodded. Weather's not usually like this in January. I heard it's beautiful here in January. Whoever told you that was trying to sell you something? She looked at him. He was not smiling exactly, but the corners of his eyes had shifted slightly. The minimal version of something warmer. She got in the Honda and drove to the bed and breakfast. She came back the following Tuesday. She did not come back in between because she did not want to come back every day and make the frequency notable, but she came back the following Tuesday with a noise in the front end that she had manufactured by loosening the sway bar end link with a wrench she'd bought at the hardware store on Spruce, which had felt both ingenious and pathetic, and which she did without entirely examining her reasons. Ethan was at the garage. She had known he would be. She'd checked the school calendar, which was public, but still, seeing him in person for the first time was different from knowing he existed. He was smaller than she expected, or perhaps his stillness made him seem smaller. He sat on his stool at the corner workbench with a sketchbook open, a pencil moving with that patient, self-contained motion that belongs to people who have found something they can do almost without thinking, the body proceeding while the mind goes somewhere else. He looked up when she came in and regarded her with the same considered, unhurried attention she'd noticed in his father. Hi, he said. Hi, she said. He looked back at his sketchbook. He had not decided about her yet, she sensed. He was still gathering information. She handed Daniel her keys and described the front-end noise in terms she hoped were plausible. He took the car for a short drive, came back, got under the front end. She sat on the carpet bench and looked at Ethan's drawing, which today was something different. Not a house this time, but a landscape. Trees and snow. Distance implied by the way the line work simplified as it retreated toward the horizon. Is that Ridgeline Road? She asked, because it looked like Ridgeline Road. Ethan looked at the drawing, then at her. How do you know Ridgeline Road? I drove in on it when I came to town. The trees over it look like that. He looked back at the drawing with a new expression. One that suggested he was recalibrating the drawing in light of this confirmation. I've been there once, he said. There was an accident. A car accident? Yeah. He picked up a softer pencil and added a detail to the foreground. My dad pulled somebody out. She held herself very carefully still. That sounds scary. I wasn't scared, he said, with absolute conviction. My dad wasn't scared either. He just did it. She looked at the drawing for a moment longer. Can I see? Ethan, after a brief pause, held the sketchbook toward her. The landscape was better than she'd understood from a distance. The perspective was slightly elevated, looking down on the road through the trees. And in the far right corner of the composition, he had added something small, a gray shape, a vehicle, barely more than a suggestion, but placed with compositional intent. She handed the sketchbook back. You're very good, she said. Ethan looked at the drawing with the critical eyes of someone assessing their own work honestly. I know, he said, without vanity. But I want to be better. When Daniel came back from under the car, the end link she'd loosened, located and retightened in 11 minutes, he named a price, and she paid it, and she was almost to the door when Ethan said, without particular weight, Are you coming back? She stopped. I don't know, she said. Probably. Okay, he said, and went back to drawing. She came back the following week with a genuinely misfiring cylinder, the result of a spark plug she had extracted and lightly filed, and the week after that, with a very real fluid leak she had simply noticed and not fixed herself because it gave her a reason. By the fourth visit, Daniel no longer did the slight formality of writing a paper receipt before she paid. And Ethan had, without ceremony, shown her 3 more sketchbooks. By the 6th visit, when the day ran later than expected and she was still there when Ethan got hungry, Daniel said, with a quality of casualness that was not entirely casual, You're welcome to stay for dinner if you want. It's not much. It was spaghetti. He made it from scratch sauce from canned tomatoes and garlic and dried herbs, the pasta from a box. But the sauce was good, genuinely good, with attention in it, and they ate at the kitchen table, which had a groove in one edge, where Ethan rested his pencil when he wasn't drawing. And outside the kitchen window the snow fell in the particular sideways, way it falls when there's wind, and the kitchen was warm and smelled of garlic, and the baseboard heater made a sound like breathing. She had eaten in restaurants where the plates cost more than this table. She had attended dinners where the wine had been chosen by a sommelier, whose salary exceeded most people's annual income. She had never, that she could recall, sat at a table where the food was made by someone who was genuinely trying to feed her. Good sauce, she said. My wife's recipe, Daniel said. He said it cleanly, without weight, the way you say something you have practiced saying until the practice doesn't show. Ethan was winding spaghetti around his fork with the focused effort of someone who takes winding spaghetti seriously. Mom put basil in at the end, he said. Dad forgets. I don't forget, Daniel said. I disagree. Ethan looked at Emily. He forgets. She laughed a real laugh, the kind that comes before you've decided to have it, and the sound of it surprised her, and seemed to surprise Daniel slightly, and Ethan looked pleased in the way of a child who has correctly predicted a social outcome. Outside, the snow kept falling. She stayed until 8:30 and drove back to the bed and breakfast, and sat on the edge of the bed in her coat, and did not immediately take her phone out. She had been coming to Silver Creek for 6 weeks, when Daniel Brooks became certain that something was wrong. Not wrong in the sense of bad or dangerous. Wrong in the sense of misaligned, the sensation you get when a sound is almost right but off by a frequency you can't identify. He had been living around misalignment for almost 2 years. He knew its texture. Emily Carter knew things that a graphic designer from New York, visiting Colorado for a personal week that had stretched to 6, would not ordinarily know. She knew the names of venture capital structures. She mentioned, once, a gallery in Basel in a way that suggested she had been to Art Basel and found it exhausting, and when he asked about this, she shifted the subject cleanly. She spoke French fluently, which emerged when Ethan asked about a French phrase in a picture book, and which she offered without thinking, and then seemed to notice she had offered it. She was not who she said she was. He had been reasonably certain of this for 2 weeks. The question he kept circling was what to do about it. He was not afraid of her. He was not certain what he felt, which was its own problem. Ethan had opened up to her in ways he had not opened to anyone since Laura died, sharing the sketchbooks, asking her questions, teaching her, with great seriousness, the correct way to hold a pencil when you wanted to make a thick line versus a thin one. This was not a small thing. Ethan's openness was not given lightly. He was sitting in the garage one evening after closing, going through invoices, when his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. He didn't answer. 2 minutes later, it buzzed again. He answered. The voice was a woman's, brisk and formal. Mr. Brooks, this is Petra Vasquez, calling on behalf of Victoria Hale. He had ended the call before she could finish the sentence. He had not known, until that moment, how much he did not want to know. He sat with the invoice book open in front of him and looked at the workbench in the corner and thought about Ethan's pencil turning in the light and the sound of his son laughing at something Emily had said 3 nights ago over dinner, a sound that had gone missing for most of 19 months and had come back recently, tentatively, like something testing the ice. He did not call Petra Vasquez back. 2 days later, Emily came in with a check engine light, which was real, and while he was diagnosing it, his phone rang again, and he let it go to voicemail, and he told himself this was not about Emily, and that the two things were unconnected, which he knew was not true. That night, after Ethan was in bed, he looked up Victoria Hale. He sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open and the light too bright and read about a woman who had built one of the most significant private art enterprises in the world from a starting capital of $400,000 and a reputation for seeing things in artists before anyone else could. He read about a car accident on a mountain road in Aspen 3 months ago. He read a profile from a business magazine that described her as variously brilliant, relentless, private, and ruthless, though the profile admitted this last characterization came mostly from people she had outcompeted, which was not, Daniel thought, the most objective source. There was a photograph. He looked at it for a long time. The angle of her face, slightly turned, the gray eyes that Ethan had noticed from the base of an embankment on Ridgeline Road. He didn't say anything for 3 days. He watched her. He watched her the way he watched cars before he put them on the lift, looking for what was visible before beginning to look for what wasn't. She had adjusted, very slightly, to the rhythms of Silver Creek. She knew which stool at the diner had the wobbly leg. She had learned the shortcut through the lumberyard parking lot that saved 7 minutes on the way to the highway. She was learning the particular patience that Ethan required, the quality of waiting that allowed the boy to come forward on his own terms, rather than being drawn out. He watched her be genuine. This was the thing he couldn't resolve. Whatever she had come here not being honest about. Her presence in this house, at this table, with his son, that was not a performance. He was certain of this, and his certainty made the other thing harder, not easier. On the 4th day, she arrived in the morning with a question about an oil change. And while she was filling out the work order at the counter, he said quietly, "Victoria." She looked up. He watched her face do the work. He watched her weigh denial and find it too small to carry. He watched something shift under her expression. Not shame. Exactly. Something more complicated. Something that had been held in place for a long time and was now, carefully, being set down. "How long have you known?" she asked. 2 weeks, mostly. 3 days, completely. She set down the pen. She looked past him for a moment. At the garage. At the snow outside. At the space where things are examined before they're spoken. "I wasn't trying to," she began, and then stopped. Because she was clearly going to lie, not maliciously, but reflexively, in the way of someone whose practiced response no longer fits the situation. She started again. "I wanted to understand why you did what you did on Ridgeline Road. Without being Victoria Hale when I asked. And now you understand it? I understand it because you don't think it requires understanding. That's what I had to come here to see." He looked at her for a moment. "And Ethan?" The question landed the way he meant it to, not as an accusation, but as the thing they had both been approaching and not saying. Her expression shifted again. The complicated thing underneath got more complicated. "I care about him," she said, simply. "I know you do," Daniel said. "That's what makes this hard." Ethan was at school. The garage was empty except for the two of them, and the distant sound of the oil change timer, which Daniel reached past her to silence. "You should have told me," he said. "Yes," she said. "I might have." He stopped. He thought about what he might have done. He was not certain the answer was what he had assumed it would be when he first found out. "I don't know what I would have done." "Neither do I," she said. "That's why I didn't." He handed her back the work order without filling in the time. "I need a few days," he said. "Come back on Friday." She nodded. She took her keys. At the door she paused. He could see her deciding whether to say something. The visible deliberation of someone who has learned caution and is trying to decide whether it still applies. "The sauce," she said. "You do forget the basil. But it's still very good." She left. He stood in the empty garage and looked at the workbench in the corner, the stool, the pencil case, the smaller sketchbook Ethan had started leaving there permanently because there was no reason to bring it home. He did not come to any conclusions on the first day or the second. On a Thursday evening, 18 days after the confrontation in the garage, Ethan collapsed at school. He had been sitting at his desk, 3 minutes into a geography lesson on the Great Plains, when he stood up abruptly, said, "I don't feel good," sat back down, and slid sideways out of his chair. His teacher, a level-headed woman named Mrs. Calloway, who had been teaching 3rd grade for 22 years, called 911 before he hit the floor. The paramedics arrived in 9 minutes. Daniel arrived at the school in 7, having run the last 2 blocks from the garage. At the hospital in Glenwood Springs, a cardiologist named Dr. Reeves used words like arrhythmia and structural anomaly and interventional cardiology with the particular care of someone assembling a difficult sentence 1 word at a time, making sure each one was load-bearing before adding the next. He explained that Ethan had a congenital cardiac condition present since birth, invisible, until it wasn't, that would require a surgical intervention to correct. A catheterization procedure, not open heart, but specialized. The center in Denver that handled this particular presentation was one of 4 in the country, with the necessary volume and expertise. The cost, before insurance, was significant. After insurance, it was still significant. Daniel sat in the corridor outside the room where Ethan was sleeping, attached to a monitor, and held a styrofoam cup of cold coffee, and looked at the linoleum floor, and did the math he had been avoiding since the doctor left. His savings: $14,000. His credit limit: 8. The garage: an asset, but an illiquid one. And the loan process would take weeks. The shortfall was substantial. He called his brother in Grand Junction. He called the hospital's financial counselor at 7 in the morning and was told about payment plans and charity care programs and assistance funds. He wrote down the numbers and looked at them and knew the timelines were longer than the situation allowed. He did not call Victoria Hale. He had her number. Petra Vasquez had left it in the voicemail 3 weeks ago, and he looked at it in his contacts and did not call. He was still looking at it on the second morning when Petra Vasquez called him. "Mr. Brooks, I apologize for calling again. Miss Hale asked me to call. She heard about your son." He almost ended the call. His thumb found the red button. He did not press it. "How did she hear?" he asked. She stayed in Silver Creek, Mr. Brooks. She was at the bed and breakfast when the ambulance was called. He was quiet. She would like to help. She asked me to tell you that she's already spoken to Dr. Marcus Webb at Children's Hospital in Denver, who is the specific surgeon your son needs, and he has a slot available in 12 days. The financial aspect is—" "Stop," Daniel said. He held the phone and looked at the window. It was snowing in Glenwood Springs, too. It was always snowing somewhere. "Is she there?" he asked. "At the hospital. She's in the waiting area on the ground floor. She came last night. She wasn't going to come upstairs unless you asked her." He looked at the door of Ethan's room. Through the small window he could see the monitor, the steady green line of his son's heartbeat, the small shape under the hospital blanket. "Tell her she can come up," he said. She came up. She did not bring flowers or food or an explanation. She came up the stairs and she came down the corridor, and she came to where Daniel was standing outside the door. And she stopped, and she looked at him, and she said, "I'm sorry." "For what specifically?" he said. "It was not unkind. For the way I handled it. The beginning of it." She paused. "Not for being here. I'm not sorry for that." He considered this. He looked at the door, at the green line, through the window. "He's sleeping," he said. "But he knows you're here." I told him. "What did he say?" He said, "Can she bring the big sketchbook?" She looked at him for a long moment, not searching his face. "Exactly. More the way you look at someone when you are no longer trying to calculate anything, when you have stopped managing the distance and are just looking." "I have the surgery arranged," she said quietly. "Dr. Webb is the best in the country for this presentation. Not the best available, the best." Categorically. He looked at the linoleum. "I can pay you back." "You can't," she said, without unkindness. "Not at this level. You know that." "I know that." "Then let me do this." "Not as a transaction. Not as an obligation." She stopped, finding the right words. And he had the sense that she was not accustomed to needing to find them. "He taught me to hold a pencil correctly," she said. "He showed me 8 sketchbooks. He told me, the third time I came to the garage, that I had kind eyes, which is not something people say to me, as a general rule." Daniel looked at her. "He told me that too. Then we agree on something." He laughed a short, quiet laugh, the kind that comes out when you don't have the energy to hold it back. She did not smile, but something in her expression loosened. "Friday," she said. And it took him a moment to understand that she was referencing the last thing he had said to her. 3 weeks and a continent of experience ago. "Come back on Friday." "Yeah," he said. Friday, Ethan came home on a Tuesday. The surgery had gone well better than projected, Dr. Webb said, with the particular satisfaction of a craftsman whose work has gone right. Full recovery expected in 6 to 8 weeks. No restrictions on drawing. This last point Ethan had asked about directly, which had made the surgeon smile. Daniel brought him home in the Chevy pickup. The same truck. The same mountain roads. The same Douglas firs, standing heavy with late winter snow. And Ethan looked out the window at all of it, the way he looked at most things, calmly, thoroughly, filing it away. "Is Emily coming to dinner?" he asked. "She offered," Daniel said. "What did you say?" "I said we'd see." Ethan considered this. "You should say yes." "Is that right?" "She'll make you remember the basil," Ethan said. Daniel looked at the road. The Douglas firs made arches overhead, and through them the late winter sky was the pale blue of something that has been cold for a long time and is beginning, tentatively, to consider otherwise. "I'll call her," he said. "She came at 6. She brought bread from the bakery in Silver Creek and a jar of dried basil, presented to Daniel without ceremony, which made Ethan make a specific sound of triumph he had inherited from Laura, and which Daniel hadn't heard in a long time. The 3 of them made dinner, or rather, Daniel made dinner, and Ethan supervised, and Victoria handed things over from the counter, learning where things lived in the kitchen the way you learn the layout of a room you intend to return to. They ate. Outside the window, the last of the day's light went pink on the snow. The baseboard heater breathed. After dinner, while Daniel washed the dishes, Ethan got his big sketchbook from the couch where he'd left it. He was not yet fully mobile and moved with the careful deliberateness of someone conserving effort, and he opened it to a new page and began to draw. Victoria sat at the table and watched him work. She did not offer suggestions or ask what he was drawing, because she had learned this was not how Ethan worked. You watched. And when it was ready, he would show you. Daniel came and sat across from her with a cup of coffee. And for a while neither of them said anything. This was something they had arrived at over the preceding months, the ability to be in the same room without filling it with words. A capacity that had taken Daniel years to develop with Laura and which he had assumed, somewhere in the long, cold quiet of the last 19 months, would not come again. It had come again. He was still getting used to it. "I'm going back to New York next week," Victoria said. "Briefly. There's a board meeting I can't delegate." "Okay," he said. I'd like to come back. He looked at his coffee. I know you would. And you'd like that, she said, which was not entirely a question. I'd like that, he said. She nodded. She looked at Ethan, who was drawing with his whole upper body engaged, the pencil moving in long arcs, and then short, precise strokes, the language of someone who has been doing this long enough that the hand knows more than the mind can articulate. I'm not easy, she said. I noticed. I run a global company. I travel. I'm not available in the ways that might be useful. She said this levelly, without apology, the way you lay out a contract. Clearly, with nothing obscured. I fix cars, Daniel said. I'm available in basically all the ways. She looked at him, the faintest version of a smile, the one he had seen, over the past months, that came before a real one. Ethan, she said, without turning. What are you drawing? You'll see when it's done, he said, with the absolute authority of a creative professional. They waited. When he was done, he turned the sketchbook around on the table, so they could both see it. It was Ridgeline Road. The arches of the trees, the snow in white that was not colored in but simply left as the page itself, the absence of mark standing for brightness. In the foreground, very small, a truck on the road. Beside the road, a tree. And at the tree's base, a shape that could be a car. And 3 figures. 2 tall, 1 small, standing in the snow. No one was leaving. No one was arriving. They were simply there, in the cold, bright air under the trees, the 3 of them small against the landscape and the landscape going on forever in every direction. And at the bottom right corner of the drawing, in the small, clear handwriting, Ethan had been practicing for months. Ridgeline, January. Daniel looked at the drawing for a long time. He looked at it the way he looked at things that he did not have language for yet, quietly, without rushing. Victoria reached across the table and put her hand over his, briefly, and then took it back. The basil, Ethan said, beginning a new drawing, was better. Outside, the snow had begun again, soft and unhurried, settling on the pines and the road and the covered porch and the driveway and the old Chevy and the Honda that was parked beside it, the way snow settles on everything eventually without preference, without judgment, making the whole world briefly, quietly, the same.